Now, there's something that I wanted to clarify, because I think some people have got the wrong idea. And that's this, that I'm not looking to acquire students. I'm not looking to gain students. And when I say that I want to build a meditation retreat or a place of practice, I'm not saying that I want to establish some kind of spiritual community. In fact, that, to me, sounds like an absolute nightmare. There's all kinds of problems associated with that. When I'm talking about a place of practice, what I'm saying is basically that here in North America, there aren't places for people who are serious about their meditation where they can go and they can just get on with their practice, right? Because they've got to do things like they've got to earn money to live, they've got to pay their rent, and basically anything that happens in the West is a commercial exchange. It's a kind of economic. Basically anything that happens in the West is some kind of commercial venture. It's all about paying a fee or a wage and getting a place somewhere, and then basically you have to look after your own finances. And it's the same for the retreat centers. I mean, these retreat centers where people do 3 and 4 year retreats. Well, before you go, you've got to find like, $40,000 or something like that to be able to stay in this place for 3 or 4 years. And you've got to put aside all your work. If you're a chartered accountant, then you're going to lose your degree. If you're a doctor, then once you come back out of retreat, you're going to have to requalify because you've just got to give up on your entire worldly life. So it's really difficult. And so very few people actually do that. And again, as I said before, I'm not interested in a traditional 3-year retreat. That's something different. What's lacking here is a place where people can go and they can just concentrate on their meditation with the absolute minimum of distraction, like there is in Tibet, in the mountains of Nepal. People can go off into the wilderness, they can find a little house somewhere, and they can just sit down and practice. And then they just have to worry about a little bit of food to eat, maybe a bit of wood or something for their fire, and that's it. There's nothing else. There's no taxes, there's no rent. Also, people provide them with food. There are many faithful people in the East. It doesn't happen in the West, so it's going to be very difficult. And if you want to go off into the wilderness in Canada and meditate, somebody's going to call the RCMP. You're going to get arrested. They say, there's a strange person. He's living out in the provincial park there in a cabin. Go check him out. This is what's going to happen. So it's very, very difficult. Now, what's the problem with spiritual communities? Well, anytime you've got a lot of people together, then you've got complications. Because human beings are difficult by nature. And you only have to look at what's happened in spiritual communities in the past to see what kind of troubles arise. Even if somebody is not intentionally going out of their way to cause trouble, then the interaction between different human beings leads to problems. And there's a very good teaching about this in the Buddha Dharma. They say that if you go off into a mountain retreat, then it's difficult for one person to do it on their own. Like Milarepa did, right? One person on their own, it's very difficult. They've got nobody to help them, and they could die. And if they died, nobody would even know they were dead for many months. So they say it's difficult with one. Although some very special individuals are able to do that. Milarepa did it, many others did it. And then there's also a problem if you have two. If you have two people together, then there's a chance that either they get too attached to each other, or also that they fall out, they become bitter enemies. And so you need more than two. And so they say ideally, you're talking about 3, 4, maybe 5 people. But in these spiritual communities, if you go to some sort of ashram in Portugal, there might be 70 people, 100 people living there. And they've all got their own history, their own issues. Some of them are couples in relationships. And these things are a catalyst for worldly trouble. And they just become a distraction to one's meditation practice. And I wouldn't want to do something like that. I think it's crazy. I mean, there's people like Muji, etc. He's bought a big farm somewhere in Portugal, and he has lots of people come. And I think that he's well motivated. He wants to help these people. But what help can actually be achieved is very debatable. Because the type of people who go there aren't really seriously spiritual practitioners. It's kind of like what happened in the 70s when people went on the hippie trail. They all went off to Nepal and India. They went to Afghanistan, but it didn't last. They didn't stay there. Eventually they return back to their own home countries. And maybe now they're doctors and lawyers, or they're retired, or they're dead. And there's another problem. We don't appreciate how influential our basic view is on our general conduct, the way we behave ourselves day to day. And this is a huge problem for people who teach high views. For example, there was a spiritual community in the 60s that was run by Charlie Manson. And he taught no self. He had a famous song called Cease to Exist. And he was teaching a very high view. He wanted to be a spiritual teacher. We can see how that turned out. They ended up murdering a lot of people. And the same thing happened in the Osho community. So people hear all these very high views, like I don't exist, but there are consequences to that. If you actually believe that you don't exist, that also means there are no consequences to your actions. If the individual doesn't exist, then also what they do doesn't exist. And the other thing is you can become hardened to other human beings. And so as happened in the Osho community, then thinking they were doing something good for their guru, they went out and tried to poison an entire city. This is the kind of thing that happens to people when they listen to high views they don't understand. Then they lose the plot, and it's very dangerous. And as I said, even if your community is founded on good principles, there is a chance that things will go wrong. And also, when the teacher passes on and somebody else takes over, there's no telling where that can lead. And there's uncountable stories about people who have started spiritual communities. Jonestown. In Kenya, we've recently had this starvation cult. There are loads of them. And that's because people who don't understand high views are capable of doing anything. To my mind, the problem here is that if you think you have a very high view, and you don't understand it, then that leads to very real consequences. If you believe nothing exists, you have a nihilistic view, there is no you, there is no me, there is no thought, there is no good and bad, well then, as a consequence of that, also you have to believe that it doesn't matter if I murder somebody, or if I do something that would normally be considered horrible. So it's a huge responsibility for teachers to go around and teach their students these high views. There's a purpose for these high views, but they're not simply understood by beginners in meditation. And what is clear is that somebody who has understood a high view does not have negative conduct. I mean, somebody asked Padampa Sanjay, said, is somebody who has realized emptiness capable of doing negativity? And Padampa Sanjay said, no, it is impossible, because along with the realization of emptiness comes the realization of compassion. So if you have compassion, then you're not going to harm somebody. You're only going to help them, right? This is something that is a very important point, and you need to bear this in mind. But a mere understanding of the words is not the same as realization. Merely hearing the words, you don't exist, doesn't mean you've realized that level of view. It's a very high view. Realization means it's a stable experience that lasts, whether you're in meditation or not. It doesn't mean it comes and goes, that sometimes you have a view of emptiness, but when you go to the coffee shop, emptiness doesn't exist anymore. When you go to the library, there's a self, but when you sit on your meditation cushion, there's no self. It's not like that. Realization means that that's the natural way you see the environment around you. That's how you experience reality, 24/7, when you're awake and when you're asleep. That's what the meaning of realization is. It's not the same as experience or understanding, but for most people, they don't have experience and understanding. They only have merely heard the words. There is no self. Everything is non-dual. There is no separation. But I mean, I've talked about this subject countless times. So if you haven't understood that by now, then there's no chance that you ever will. So my main point here is, I'm not looking for students. Students are actually a problem. They're trouble. I mean, people want students because they want to be famous. Why do we want to become a Dharma teacher? It's because we're completely worldly individuals. We want to be sat on a stage and have other people respect us and to be seen to be somebody important, to have qualities. And so most of the Dharma teachers kind of put on an act. They act like they're somebody who, in their mouth, butter wouldn't melt. They're the most compassionate and kind individuals. Does that mean that they never get angry? No, they do get angry. It's basically an act. Because we want to portray those qualities that we see to be positive. And this is a huge problem in spirituality, because we hear that a spiritually enlightened being has compassion, has bodhicitta. And so we try to talk very softly all the time, and be very kind to them, and be very concerned about their problems. But if this is just an act, it is not actually beneficial. And we can tell generally. You can tell by their actions whether they have true renunciation. You can tell by their actions if they have a true understanding of compassion. Because somebody who has compassion can't also be proud. If they're proud, then they absolutely don't have compassion. We also hear that it's not good to be proud, so we act humble. We act like we're insignificant. But really, we see ourselves to be very important, or to be like some kind of spiritual guru. And to me, it's dangerous. Even if I were to acquire lots of students, or some kind of community, there's a huge danger there that I'll become an egomaniac. And that, to me, is quite scary. There's something very important taught me in the Dharma, that when you're practicing, there are some things that are difficult to deal with. Now, the hardships are not the most difficult thing. The hardships of practice are a kind of obstacle, they're a challenge, but that's not the most difficult thing. The most difficult thing to forbear in your Dharma practice is the good stuff. And that's because once you start really practicing intensely, then you generate some kind of positive karma. And things naturally start opening up for you, opportunities, things start going your way. And it's these things that are hard to forbear, because we can become spoiled by our luxury. So you might spend 20 years in retreat, you've accumulated a load of karma. When you come out, suddenly you're attractive to everybody. They want to offer you money, right? People want to make offerings to you. They want you to start a Dharma center. And so you start to think like, oh yeah, that would be a good thing. But deep down inside, what is motivating you is your normal human failings. And it's the biggest trap for a spiritual teacher. And so, somebody like Milarepa, if a few students started to gather around, or he started to become famous, he would disappear. He would run away, because he was afraid of it. And I too am afraid of this. If people compliment you, then you like it, right? Well, that can spoil you. That can make you to a very proud person. Actually, it's better when people criticize you. Because when people criticize you, then you have to check your own view. And it stops you from becoming proud. So in general, the authentic lamas, they don't act all sweet and compassionate, you know. They don't act like a bodhisattva. Often, they are very hard on their students, and they challenge them. This is, I've said before, an authentic teacher will challenge you. Somebody who's not authentic will just say what you want to hear. They'll try to talk softly and act like they never get upset. And they'll only say things you want to hear and never say anything that contradicts you. That's a sign that they're not an authentic teacher, because we are here on the spiritual path to make progress. And progress is gained through effort. So you have to go through the hardships if you want to improve. There's no other way. That's the way it is. I mean, there's a great difference between these kind of authentic teachers and the fake ones. Because many Westerners are just waiting to gain some kind of title, like the title Lama or Tuku. They're just waiting at the drop of a hat to gain some stature as a spiritual teacher. But in the East, what I've observed, it's not like that. I have a friend, he's a Tuku, and he was recognized by a very, very high Lama. But he himself doesn't believe it. He thinks that he's just an ordinary person, and that it was some kind of mistake. But he's got this authorized stamp from the Karmapa, who said that he is this famous Tuku. And he's quite a high Tuku, but he's very, very humble. Now, he's not trying to cheat people, but he knows that many people have faith in the Dharma and have faith in him as this famous reincarnated Lama. And so he does everything he can to help those people and to serve them. But his own opinion is he's not anything special and he's not proud. But if it's a Westerner, as soon as they get a name, like they get the name Lama after being in a 4-year retreat, then they go around acting like a big shot. And that's because we're worldly. We have worldly aims and objectives. We like money. We like fame. We like status. We like name. We like position. And the other thing is, As Western students, then we look up to people who are famous because we're worldly. We can't follow a Lama who doesn't have a big name. We need somebody who's like the Dalai Lama that everybody's heard of. I'm a student of the Dalai Lama. Yeah, you saw the Dalai Lama once in a crowd of 10,000 people and he's your main teacher, right? No, it's not like that. Your teacher is the person who guides you on the spiritual path, personally, one-to-one. It's the main catalyst for your improvement in spirituality. But nobody wants to say, for example, my teacher is Khenpo Labu. Who's Khenpo Labu? I mean, who the hell is he? I've never heard of him. He can't be very good. He's not famous. That's because we're worldly. We don't understand. The real, authentic yogis and masters disappear into the mountains. We don't meet them. We don't hear about them. If you want to even find them, you've got to go off into the forest or the wilderness somewhere. You won't see them in a big teaching hall, in a convention center. They're not selling tickets for a week retreat, $3,600 US for a week retreat. They don't put billboards up. They don't make advertisements on YouTube. Authentic masters are humble, and they're secret yogis. They live in caves and in the wilderness. But you won't understand this point, because we're attracted to fame and fortune and money and all these worldly things, because we're 100% worldly people. Anyway, it's getting late and the ferry's coming and I've got to get going. So I just thought I'd make a short video, and I'll see you again later. Bye.